Hello and welcome to another edition of Facebook Live. I'm coming live today briefly because I'm looking at the article and we just discovered that Cyntonia Brown was granted clemency. Now, why is that an interesting case? It's an interesting case for me and for many other people because the issue is about, and I'll take it back, and for anyone who doesn't know about it, when she was 15 years old, Miss Brown, I guess 16 years old when she was actually convicted, 16 years old, Miss Brown was convicted of murder. As part of her conviction, she was tried as an adult, and the 43-year-old man that she was convicted of murder and in fact admitted to murdering, had bought her for sexual purposes. Think about that. He purchased her from a pimp when she was a minor. So modern day slavery is not just slavery and making people work for you, it's making children have sex with you. Let's talk about that first and foremost. So by her own admission, she did in fact kill him, and when she killed him, she said that I guess she took his truck and his wallet and guns and left, but she had a pimp. Pimp. Hate that word in this case. And she was afraid to go back to him empty-handed because he had sold her off, obviously, and she was supposed to bring back money. Now, she was tried as an adult. The juvenile court said that she was able to be tried as an adult. The other thing that was interesting about this is apparently throughout the trial, they referred to her as a teenage prostitute. So let's get the language right first and foremost. If you are a teenager, if you are under the age of consent, if you cannot consent to sexual activity, and someone forces you, encourages you, makes you, takes money for you to have sex with other people, that does not make you a prostitute. That makes you a victim of sex slavery. It is not prostitution. So that's the first thing. So when we look back years ago, this woman is now 30 years old. We look back a good 15 years ago when she was convicted. Even now, the statutes have changed. The statutes in Tennessee where she lives have changed, and that she wouldn't have been referred to in this way as some sort of teen prostitute, like she's somehow at fault, but actually as a victory of sexual slavery. A lot of A-list celebrities, and B-list, as well as a certain U.S. congressman and others have been involved in this case in trying to get clemency granted for her. So basically, this happened in 2004. Brown, who killed Johnny Mitchell Allen, said he had solicited her for sex and taken her back to his house. And all this occurred back at his home. Now, the interesting thing about it is that there's a nonprofit where the person says, it's called, nonprofit called End Slavery Tennessee, and talks about how they refer to this child often as a teen prostitute. And we know there's no such thing as a teen prostitute because if you say that, you're saying that this teenager's agreed to be raped multiple times a day, to the point where their bodies are broken for money they don't even get to keep. And even if they did want money for it, really? Do we think that's a great plan? And so there was a documentary done in 2011 that talked about how she was forced into prostitution at a young age, sex trafficked, and raped repeatedly. And the person that she killed was one of these rapists. Let's think about it. He bought a 15, 16-year-old girl for purposes of having sex, and he's like as old as I am now at the time, which means that he was engaged in horrible illegal activity. And she murdered him. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying you should kill people. But I guess he's also a rapist. Her rapist, who had just finished raping her. Okay, so she also had some other cognitive issues, apparently fetal alcohol syndrome, which may have affected her brain, and some other things that did not come out in the trial. But what's interesting about this is that when they did make the claim that she deserved clemency, they didn't just talk about the horror of the case and the horror of how they treated this teenager. They talked about all that she's done since then. Apparently she's been pursuing a college education while she's been in prison. She started a nonprofit group while she's in prison. She's been a model prisoner. She's done all these things. And while those things are wonderful, I guess the question becomes, even if she had done nothing but sit for the last 15 years, was the punishment too harsh for the crime? Even if she had done nothing, if she had not started a nonprofit, if she had not gone after and pursued a college education, when a 16-year-old girl was repeatedly raped, suffering under the effects of trauma, has already mental disorders or defects that have come from her childhood, and this person is engaged in actively raping her. What is the level of force that she could take to protect herself? What's the level of force? Those are the kind of things that we have to decide as a society. If I were representing this young woman, I think that I would also make a lot of those arguments. And those arguments would include, one, what was she doing at the time? Why was she there? Was she there of her own free will? Mm-mm. She's a 16-year-old. She doesn't get to consent to have sex with 43-year-old men. We've talked about this before, guys. Was she being prostituted, sex trafficked? Yeah, absolutely, she was, and we know that. Did the punishment fit the crime? What kind of crime? Was there a defense to the crime that he had just raped her and that she was in fear for her life? Those are all the things that have to go into the analysis of what you're going to do when you have children who are involved in the criminal justice system, especially. And in fact, not just children. There are other young women who are possibly adults, but who are being held against their will and forced to be trafficked and forced to be prostituted over and over and over again. At what point do we protect these women and say that if someone has purchased you for sex from some so-called pimp, and I would call him a slave trader, if someone has purchased you for sex, how far can you go in defending yourself? What do you guys think? How far could you go? How far should she go? What would you do if it was you, if it was your daughter, if it was your son? I'd love to know how people feel, because what happens is that for some of us it's a simple thing. I'm like immediately, oh, she's a child. She was being trafficked for sexual purposes. She can kill who she wants to kill. Maybe that's how I feel. Other people might go, hey, it doesn't matter what's going on. You could escape. Escape is good, but killing is bad. So there are some people who feel that way as well. But at the end of the day, this young woman has finally been granted clemency, and I think it's well-deserved clemency. I think after 15 years of being in jail for what could be a horrific crime, except what was done to her was also a horrific crime. And not just a horrific crime, because think about it. She murdered a guy right there in the moment, in the act of having purchased her for sex when she was 16 years old, who had just raped her because she was not able to consent to it. And then she killed him, right? Hey, Aunt Hattie. And so the question is, what was her appropriate response at that time? You see, the difference is she committed one horrible act at one moment. But what was done to her was happening over and over and over again, multiple times a day. Think about it. A child being raped multiple times a day. Someone getting paid for that multiple times a day. For this child's rape over and over and over again. And then at the end of the day, the person who ends up being charged and convicted is the young woman who finally fought back. We have to do something different about our laws, but not just our laws. We have to do something different about the way we understand things. Because if they had understood it in the way that we do now, they would have not referred to her as a teen prostitute. They would have called her a victim of sexual slavery, a victim of sex trafficking, a victim who in that moment took some power back. I am not an advocate for murder. I do not believe in killing. I absolutely do not. But I am also a criminal defense attorney who understands that sometimes the reason that people get involved in a crime is because they have no good response to what's going on around them. And so I'm asking all of you, what should her response have been? Is there a good response? What would you have done? So thank you for joining us for this quick Facebook Live, and I can't wait to hear from you about your thoughts.